Hello, my name is Jakob Leander, and welcome to this market talk on capitalizing on big data. I'm from a company called Avanade that specializes in producing innovative results using Microsoft technology. So the agenda for today is we are going to talk a little bit about big data, the why and the how, which I think is important. Based on a survey we did last year, a global survey, we have produced some steps that can help you capitalize on your big data. And lastly, I want to talk a little bit about the building blocks for managing big data, so how you actually do it in reality. One of the first things, this is one of my big passions, but one of the first things I think is very, very important to understand and agree on is that online channel is important for everybody. So it doesn't really matter whether you are a small company, a large company, whether you're selling products or whether you're selling services, the online channel is important. Google a few years back released some very interesting research they call CMOT, or the Zero Moment of Truth, which is highly recommended in case you don't know it. And basically, to sum that up shortly, that means a shift has been happening in the last years, which is basically about that consumers now will go online for decision making to a much larger extent than they did in the past. So one example, when a customer is considering to buy your products or services, or any products or services related to what you do, they will go online, they will type in brand names, they will search for reviews, look in forums to make the decisions they do. And obviously Google has a lot of numbers to back this up, but I'm sure most of you actually already know or have tried yourself that whenever you're buying a washing machine or picking out a kindergarten for your kids, you will go online and try to form an opinion about the choice you're going to make. The other trend that is very interesting is that in the past, when you were doing marketing, you were basically conveying a message to the consumers, and they were hearing that, and then they were doing something. What is happening now is that when the consumers hear your message or try your products or services, they will actually talk back. So they will go to forum, online channels, your own websites, email, etc., and they will take what they learned and they will share it with others that again will make that to drive their consumer decisions. And this digital conversation basically means that that's something you're going to take part of no matter whether you want it or not. This is just a fact of life. And the thing is, actually listening to this digital conversation is pretty hard. So one of the things we always recommend is that really think about whether in this digital conversation you're only doing the talking or whether you're actually also doing the listening yourself. One of the reasons why listening in a digital conversation is so hard is that there are simply so many digital touch points now. Obviously, there's the stuff that happens on your own website where you have various analytics, but there's also what's happening on Facebook, social media, Twitter, etc. You get information through email, many other channels. And this is basically very hard because not only do you need to capture all this data, you actually also need to merge it and look at it in a way and then lastly, you actually need to figure out what all this data means, what you should do with it. So not only the customers or consumers are talking, you actually also need to understand what they're saying. And really, in a nutshell, this is basically what big data is all about. Taking all this data produced in all these channels, and you can say boiling it down to something where you can actually understand it. And why is this a problem? One of the things we believe it can be hard to get a grasp of big data is it really means different things to different people. So if you take the CMO, their challenge is basically that they see all this data lying around, they see all the good stuff they can do with it, but they have problems actually getting to the data. It's stored in silos or on the external or third-party websites where they cannot easily get to it. If you take the CIO, they see the technical challenges, and believe me, they're pretty big. I mean, you're not only dealing with your standard structured analytics data, you're dealing with Facebook commerce and Twitter feeds, etc. It's actually really, really hard technically to handle this. So obviously, they would like just one simple platform to handle the whole thing. And lastly, we have the CFO. They're obviously looking at the cost side of all this because it's not necessarily that cheap to do everything the CMO wants to do. And they are maybe also struggling a little bit of understanding why do we actually need to correlate all this data, what is the real value there. And one question we also get quite often actually in the smaller countries like Denmark is that all this talk about big data, I mean, we're a small country, so how important is this actually? I mean, do we really produce enough data to be called big data? And I think definitely yes, and one of the reasons for that is that the big data term is probably a little bit misleading because it kind of leads the thoughts into something that is very large and very big. It's not only that that's the problem, it's also that the data is unstructured and uncorrelated. So basically, when we say big data, we don't really mean just big in an absolute sense. We mean too big to handle in a standard Excel spreadsheet. So unless you basically can handle your analytic data yourself in Excel, you probably have a big data problem of some kind. So it seems to be like a universal truth that big data always produces value. Avanade wanted to challenge that a little bit and have done in the past. So we've been doing 2 surveys to figure out if big data is actually delivering on its promises. What's quite interesting, the first one some years back, and that showed that a lot of companies saw interest and potential in big data, but most of the survey results was basically around the pain points and how to actually deal with it, what to do. This year, or last year, we did a new survey, a lot of countries, more than 500 executives. And the key findings there was quite interesting because that showed that big data has really reached the tipping point now. So now most companies involved in this survey, they didn't actually see the technical challenges of the past, they more saw other things. So they believe the technology is there to actually gather this data, merge it and push it out to employees. The other thing we saw in this is that we have 75% of the respondees they claimed they say increased revenue, which is either existing or new products. And more than 75% they actually believe they will make new investment next year. So it's really on the agenda now. But obviously there's more work to be done. Around 85% of the people responding to this survey still said they have technical challenges actually dealing with all this. And quite interestingly enough, when we asked what is the problem here, is that technology or people? Whether we asked the C-level executives of the technical person or the IT people, they all said it's kind of a mix between technology and actually having the people that understand the analysis. So based on this survey, we formulated 4 more steps, MOER, with some advice that you can use to capitalize on big data. The first one is pretty obvious, is that when we're saying digital touch points and data volume keeps growing, that's probably hardly a surprise. But what is really interesting here, we think, is that when you see consumers, they don't see channels the same way you do. I mean, whether they are looking at a website or mobile site and then shifting to a shop or doing a call, they actually expect you to correlate this data and understand what they are talking about. So merging and correlation is key to actually understanding this data and preferably actually linking it directly to the same customer where possible so you can serve them the best way. And this happens all over web, media, CRM, point of sale system, mobile, social, etc. It's not only an IT problem because obviously you can throw technology at listening to conversations, but you can also to some extent actually control where those conversations are taking place. So one example is hosting forums on your own site or doing your own Facebook pages actually allows you to control where this digital conversation is taking place and to a much larger extent control and facilitate that it goes in the direction you want. The other advice we have, or the second one, is optimize. It's pretty easy to drown in all this data produced by all these channels. So when you need to figure out of this myriad of data what to use, one of the key things is actually to have a digital strategy. You need some clear goals and visions, and you actually need some KPIs that allows you to focus on what data is important. So let's take an example. So in your digital strategy or your online strategy, you need to figure out what is actually value for you, what is engagement value. Is that whether a customer buys something on your site? Pretty obvious. But what about when they sign up for a newsletter or they respond to an ad? That is actually something that you should be able to put a dollar amount on. And once you have those dollar amount, you can actually start figuring out what is the value of each digital conversation. And once you know that, then you can actually start to take baby steps to improve. So if you're doing an improvement on your site, you're moving things around, you can actually measure whether the value produced by each digital visitor is larger or smaller than before, and then you can adapt. And one of the reasons this is so important and so valuable is that once you know the value and you can prove it, it's a lot easier to get funding for more and more and more. So that's why the baby steps approach can be attractive to get some quick wins. Responding, again, is not super complicated, but this is actually an area where we see a lot of companies struggling. So getting data to the right people. A good example can be a product development group in a company, in your company maybe even. Do they actually get the results from the website? So when they do a new product launch, do they get near real-time access to data about what things customers are interested in with the new products? When interest starts dropping, what features and what feedback the customers are giving? Do they actually understand the product? Can they use it, etc.? So this data can, of course, both be very motivating to the product people, but it can also be used to produce the next generation of services. And we don't see that often that data is actually shared. The other thing is, besides actually getting to the data to the right people, you actually also need to, you can say, give them processes and tools to actually do something about the data. So let's say you have a forum and someone writes bad about your product. You actually need to agree on who is actually responsible for responding and how they actually do it. The last point we have is empowerment. It's not only enough to agree on who and what, you actually also need to empower employees across the organization on who is actually taking action and responding to digital conversations. And this should not be a centralized thing, because some of these digital conversations can be fairly technical or low level relating to a product. So you actually need the right people to be able to respond to that. And they need the training and the tools to actually be able to do it. So lastly, I'm just going to touch very briefly on the key building blocks and sum up a little bit here. So we believe one of the most important things you need to have is a digital strategy, you know, with the vision and the goals and the KPIs and the calculated engagement value. We also believe it can be very attractive to have one digital platform to handle all your channels. We normally do this on Sitecore, but can be on any other product. And this is basically somewhere where you're capturing all your content and you're measuring your online value. You need some internal collaboration tool like SharePoint to share it internally. And you need a lot of BI and reporting to actually calculate and merge and gather all these data sources. And lastly, of course, you need some glue to tie the whole thing together. And this is not to be underestimated, because all these tools produce data and can consume data, but something is missing between the tools to actually make this thing aligned with what you actually need yourself. Very quickly, I'm just going to mention cloud, because you're going to hear cloud a lot when you're considering big data. And one of the reasons for cloud is simply it's an easy way to procure and fast get in place some cheap infrastructure that can hold a lot of data and do a lot of calculations. So that's why cloud is interesting. So the key takeaways is from today, we believe big data is everybody's business, whether you really like it or not. You cannot live without it or ignore it completely. From the survey, surprisingly, many companies actually respond that they have a positive return on investment, or they see some value in big data, which we think is very interesting. There's still a lot of more work to be done. We have proposed 4 more steps. The merge, the optimize, response, and empower to actually, you can say, do something about it. And we talked a little bit about the building blocks to do it. So I think the key overall message and all that is that what we're seeing from our services, that companies are now moving from a shift to focusing on pain points to actually focusing on the value they can achieve with this emerging technology. So very exciting. So thank you from me, Jakob Leander from Avanade, for listening into this talk on big data and how to capitalize on it.